Back in the pioneering days of society, aka a couple of months ago when you could touch doorknobs without putting the government and your mother in a constant state of paranoid anxiety, I tried VR for the first time. I didn't do it out of the will of my own accord, but rather out of my mom's overbearing peer pressure after witnessing a couple of kids using the marvel of technology that is a VR headset at the arcade of my local movie theater. I'm sure that she did it because she is a considerate, nice mother who knows the things that her son enjoys, like human interaction in public, the disgusting sweat and drool present in collectively used items like arcade machines, and being forced to pay for things that I know are scams. And not at all because it is something that she would like to secretly try out for herself, but is too embarrassed to do so because she is a serious lawyer who's obsessed about her appearance rather than being herself, so she just forces her son to look ridiculous in the eyes of the public to live out a semblance of her childish desires. It's a good thing she didn't get to pick the game too, or otherwise I'd probably play something along the lines of kicking that Martin asshole in the balls because he got caught copying from you on a junior year math test and got you in trouble as a result. Prepare to die edition. Now that I've effectively shortened my lifespan up until the day that I upload this and my mom sees it, let me get to the point I was trying to make before I signed my death warrant. When the guy handling the VR headset showed me a list of available games to play, my first instinct was to pick the one that would best justify its existence in a VR platform, and my immediate pick was Superhot. After making an ass out of myself in public and playing with a barely functional controller in one hand and a low battery one in the other, I could finally sit down and reflect about the experience, and I was shocked to come to the realization that this was the first time that I had thought about Superhot in 4 full years. For a game that has held the title of the most innovative shooter I've played in years and had the huge privilege of being filleted by the entirety of the gaming community, it sure didn't create a very long-lasting impact on games themselves. Sure, we got Superhot VR and indisputable proof that great game ideas can come out of independent game developers rather than companies, but gameplay aspects after Superhot didn't really see any direct change of direction. After all, what aspect of Superhot can you change or modify in order to transform it into something different than itself? The time-slowing mechanic is kind of the whole point. A minimalistic art style isn't really unique to Superhot alone, and the overly pretentious narrative isn't what players enjoyed about it. Or wanted, for that matter. For any of you who have no clue what crack I smoke to know what I'm talking about, Superhot is a game based on a demo for the 7-day FPS challenge, released in 2013, where the main selling point was that time only moves when you do. It's a simple, yet very interesting concept that not only made for a seriously fun game with a lot of style and thoughtful gameplay, but also a lot of potential. The art style consisted of completely white environments juxtaposed by red enemies and black guns that fired bullets with a red trail, making it stand out from anything in the market at that time. If you've never played the demo, I'll put a link in the description where you can experience what many people, including myself, experienced back in the day that made Superhot, the kickstarted Steam game that resulted from the demo's success, come to reality. The 2016 Steam release of Superhot was nothing short of a success, with a VR version releasing a year later, making $1.06 million in revenues and earning lots of awards for creativity, VR experience, best shooter, and best VR game of the year. And I can't say that I disagree. Having played it for myself, I can attest to the fact that embracing the concept of being a cool action movie star who can kill 45 people in less than a minute with just a polygonal prop that somewhat resembles a gun is great. Slowing down time allows you to plan for your next move, and subsequently predicting what your enemy is going to do before they actually do it has its charm that no other game can replicate. Slicing a bullet in half with a katana is something you never thought you could experience up until playing this game, but now that you know you can, you want to try it. Then, the cherry on top of the cake is introduced when you see that after clearing a stage, you get a recreation of everything you just did in real time to make you look even more like a badass, like John Wick, back when he was actually cool and called Neo. It's difficult to not have a good time with this game, not only because it's fun to play, but because it actually makes you feel cool afterwards, which is a very hard thing to accomplish. Attempt? Yeah, you can try and fail miserably most of the time, but actually succeed? Doing that is hard. What Superhot does right is so good that it may fool you into thinking that it is a perfect game with no flaws whatsoever. Which it's not. A consequence of having a simplistic art style, for example, is that all levels look the same and it can begin to wear down on your eyes after a while, not to mention making the scenery feel repetitive even if the level design is clever. The player's hitbox can sometimes be hard to define, making some of the shots the enemies hit seem cheap or even downright bugged when you're trying to dodge attacks, which can lead you to camp in a corner waiting for enemies to funnel to your position for easy kills, kind of defeating the purpose of the game's unique mechanic. What annoyed me the most out of this game was a small delay between shooting guns. This is meant to prevent you from spamming your shots to kill all enemies while in bullet time easily, represented by your rotating crosshair in the middle of the screen, which is fine. While the ammo isn't infinite, the amount of bullets you have in each gun is limited. The thing is, the game doesn't tell you how many bullets you have. Counting your remaining bullets is also fine if there are always the same amount of bullets in the gun. Sometimes the amount of bullets your gun can have may vary, and since the game still rotates your crosshair even after your gun is empty, you could potentially waste time waiting for the delay to be over, expecting to have one more shot when you actually have none left. Finally, the fact that time moves slightly when you look around and the lack of feedback upon your death can frustrate some some players who want to scan the area before making a move or learn from their previous death, but that didn't bother me as much, so we're gonna pretend that they don't exist. Oh, and by fault of the game's design, it can become incredibly monotonous once you get over the initial spectacle, with very little replay value over its already short 1 to 2 hour long campaign. That's about it. I've explored the background, summarized and given my opinion of Superhot in 3 pages, and can say that I've pretty much satisfied anyone who was considering to buy this product and help them make a decision. But because you are all good and intelligent viewers who actually watch my videos and not just listen to them while doing something else, as if this was a goddamn podcast, you realize that the video is longer than just 3 pages. Well, that's because in July of this year, Superhot 2 was released, and I know that it's Superhot Mind Control Delete, but calling what's essentially an overpriced expansion something 20 characters longer than the original title feels like an insult to the merit the original had to begin with. Now, let me make something abundantly clear before I start talking about Superhot 2. I don't think the core gameplay is bad. I mean, it's basically the same as the last one. Like, how could this expansion be worse than the original? Therein lies the problem, the way that it is used to construct the rest of the experience. I feel that the original Superhot is a game that was best enjoyed when played in short bursts of time rather than in long sittings, for the sole reason that its wow factor has diminishing returns the more often you're exposed to it. By playing for a long amount of time, you begin to normalize how great everything looks, and it becomes the status quo, making it feel like another shooter but with less things to do despite its superficial spectacle. So of course, Superhot 2 decides to make its own unique mechanic less special by adding levels that last longer and are somehow even more repetitive than in the last installment. The levels, called nodes, are basically a cluster of maps that you have to complete in order to move on to the next node. To compensate for the fact that each node is several maps long and as a result would be a pain to get through with just one hit point, you're given an additional hit point as well as short breaks between every 3 or so levels to either heal or choose a power-up to make the process easier. The aforementioned power-ups are minor upgrades that are unlocked as you play, so the further you are into the story, the more options you'll have available to you when it comes to selecting perks. You also have an assortment of active abilities that you can select between each node to change your playstyle, make the level easier, or to just look cool if that's the sort of thing you're interested in. Now again, this is not a bad thing, and I actually like that these additions were made, since they offer a way of varying the gameplay of the original, as well as introducing experimentation and more strategic planning. The same thing goes for altering the katana to deflect bullets rather than slicing them in half to give it more of a counterplay role rather than just a way to shrivel all the pussies watching your Superhot Let's Play series. You can also praise the fact that enemies with melee weapons now have some deflecting capabilities themselves as a way to make them more active threats rather than just walking targets you're required to kill to move on to the next level. These are all additions made to improve the overall experience and make each node more complex to work with the mechanics the game already has. Conceptually, you could say the same thing about map variety and the amount of enemies required to kill to clear set maps. Look at me in the eye, I said conceptually, because in practice, these things actually make the game feel less well thought out than its predecessor. There's a pool of I think 10 or so maps that Superhot 2 randomly pulls out of to construct each one of the nodes, with each map being small and having an average of 3 enemy spawn points. If you have a mathematically programmed brain, you're probably thinking, great! The amount of possibilities generated with the combinations of these 12 maps, 30 different spawn points, and better enemy variety is already 4 times as long as the original Superhot's campaign, so we can pull off 4 times the gameplay with less than 4 times the effort. I can finally move on with my life and make something that doesn't scream Superhot at me every 2 seconds. I'm finally free! I do hope that one developer is now free from the clutches of this rogue AI, because it is certainly the only way that I can see putting up with these nodes as worth it. By creating a theoretically large amount of possibilities of maps in which to potentially play in order to avoid the problem of lack of replay value the original had, Superhot 2 sacrificed the quality of each individual node. The fact that each time you play on the map is meant to be different from the last is also reinforced by eliminating enemy placement altogether and using set spawn points from where enemies could appear instead, with the exception of 2 or 3 enemies that will appear next to you as you yourself spawn. If you've ever played the original Superhot's Endless mode, or hell, even watched a Let's Play of it on YouTube, then you'd realize that small maps where enemies spawn randomly from set locations gets repetitive extremely quickly. So, I don't know how, but they managed to turn the solution for the original problem they had into an even bigger problem on a league of its own. Whereas I couldn't find myself playing Superhot past the story and maybe a couple of runs on Endless mode, I'm struggling to even finish the campaign in this one. It's not that much of a problem at the beginning, where nodes are like 3 or 5 maps long, but it starts to get real tiring when they get a cram 8 or 10 in there. And besides, by this late in the game, you'll probably already have seen 99% of these maps over and over again, so it's not like the whole large amount of possibilities thing holds up as well as you thought it would, especially when you die in the last map and have to do the entire goddamn node again. Dying is the last thing you want to do here because it sends you back to the first map in the node and gets you closer to finally drinking that rat poison cocktail you keep daydreaming about. I ended up choosing the active ability that grants you more hearts to survive and healing every time I could instead of picking up cool power-ups and abilities because I was more interested in actually beating the nodes before this game would deep fry mine. And deep fry they did, because although new enemies and interesting abilities were introduced as the game went by, lifting my brain out of the deep fryer, the sheer repetition and oddly enough the removal of some of them later on ensured the slow descent of my frontal lobe back down into the peanut oil. Superhot 2 introduced proximity mines, enemies with only one vulnerable spot, enemies that shoot bullets out of their spikes when they die, and enemies who can use the same active abilities as you, which spice up the gameplay as much as they bring problems for me. The guy that explodes can explode in directions other than where his spikes are pointing, which is especially bullshit when you spawn right next to him. The guys with weak points can just not die because of faulty hit detection, and the special enemies can be hard to avoid because they're invincible. This is on top of the aforementioned hard to define hitbox, confusing reload thingy, and a new problem that I didn't notice in the original Superhot, which is that enemies can sometimes shoot through walls. Hell, even the potato mine can have its shortcomings on maps where the layout is actively distorted to screw with your aim and prediction. Like I've said before, it's not bad and it could actually make for really good levels where layout design and enemy and weapon placement mattered. It would also not give me headaches and motivate me greatly if this game didn't tell me to eat shit and to stop pointlessly wasting my time trying to beat it every time the story reared its intellectual head in. Ah yes, the story, the part of this game that's meant to confuse, dazzle, amaze, and leave dim-witted players in awe because of its superficial complexity. It has what's necessary to become one of those highly debated and discussed stories in video game history. The first game had bits of lore hidden in the end user's license agreements, sinister undertones, and an interface and chat logs modeled after MS-DOS, hints of something larger going on than what the game gives you, the suspicious feeling that you're not in control, shutting down the game as a form of storytelling, the works. It has enough ambiguity to be able to satisfy people who notice the details, connect the dots, and say, huh, interesting. And enough loose ends to keep those people who dig in way deeper than was intended to keep theorizing about it forever. It's a surprise a certain internet user known for theorizing only made a single video on this, as opposed to over 140 of them. Oh, but it doesn't stop there, because this story needed to be more special than it had any right to be. It had to be intelligent and meta. So, in case you haven't figured it out, the story of Superhot is basically the same as The Matrix. People are enslaved by a rogue AI that presented itself as nothing more than an addictive game in order to assimilate people into itself, but turned out to do malicious shit like causing violent shootings and senseless attacks in the real world as a result. You kill your physical body, enter the system, and become one of us. While everybody fighting, trying to free themselves from the system, is living a fallacy constructed by the AI itself to give them an illusion of free will and hope. It's a computer virus affecting the human mind, and by the time you figure that out, you've already lost your free will by the mere fact that you're playing its game. Okay, so you've taught me to read the end-user license agreement of stuff that I download onto my computer. Cool. But if you wanted to blow my mind with this type of storytelling and give me a revolutionary message about addiction and provide commentary on how video games can provide a much better insight into complex themes than we give them credit for, then you must be under the direct influence of Superhot's AI, because the point fell moot as soon as the game's relevancy began to fade. Probably consumed by other more addicting games released later on that year, ironically enough. I have no physical characters to connect to or hate, no themes present for me to analyze, and ultimately nothing happens in the story because it's a simulation meant to stimulate my computer's USB port. The demo had something going on at least, where at the end of it some G-Man-like character made you question your character's motives and actions up until that point, and at least made me think about who I was and whether or not we were meant to be seen as the good guys in that scenario. Why was my loyalty to this guy so strong and unbreaking that I decided to kill myself when he ordered me to? This is a question that could have had an interesting answer, but no. You are living in a simulation! Hey viewer, yeah, you watching this video. Isn't it amazing, new, refreshing, and self-aware when a YouTuber talks to the audience condescendingly to prove a point? Are you aware that you are being manipulated into agreeing with an opinion? Man, fourth wall breaks sure are effective when used as a crutch to advance a plot, aren't they, viewer? Yeah, I think this is a reason why Superhot 2 was even less heavy on the implications of the plot. Since the seeds to this conspiracy have already been planted in the first game, as well as being difficult to shock the audience with the same plot twist again, they instead went for the minimalist route of having the AI scold you for playing the game, because doing so is ultimately pointless and a waste of time. Oh, would you look at that, my clothes are finally done washing. Great timing too, because with the amount of irony I got going on here, I'll be able to finish drying them up in no time. The story this time has something I do enjoy though, and that's characters. The characters of Superhot 2 are what I really liked about this game, because unlike their predecessors, they exist. These characters manifest in the form of the special unkillable enemies you begin to face in the later stages of the game, namely the dog, the ninja, and the addict. They are sometimes alluded to in some of the text logs that you unlock after you play some of the notes, which give you a little bit of insight as to who these people are outside of the game. I really like this because it is a natural expansion of the lore, which implied that there are thousands of players worldwide playing Superhot, and it made you wonder why you hadn't ever come across one as you played it yourself. Later on in the story, you meet each one of them, and in order to remove them from the game entirely, you must sacrifice the ability related to the corresponding character, which gives you an opportunity to learn a bit more about them. The dog's chat logs use classic dog phrases like, "Who's a good boy?" And in-game, he uses the dash ability to quickly cut distances to kill you. It's later revealed that the dog is bound to a wheelchair in a mental institution, implied to be extremely anxious due to the amount of influence the system had on him, which is reflected by his twitchy and chaotic playstyle. The other two are just as good, with the ninja being an angry man obsessed with knives and driven by anger, which is why his playstyle is offensive, with him throwing and recalling the katana, and when you finally do get rid of him, you can see him meditating in peace, having gotten rid of the system's influence and his own anger issues to be in control, or about to commit seppuku, depending on how you interpret it. The addict is a player obsessed with Superhot who has made it his main objective to remain unbeaten. As a result, he uses the hot switch ability to keep you in check and him in control in the majority of the situations. Beating him sends him into a depressed, psychotic state where he can no longer play and decides to jump off a window because his life has no meaning to him anymore. He acts as a great warning of what could become of the player character, named Avarice, whose defining character flaw is greed and will stop at nothing to keep playing the game. This includes obtaining upgrades, abilities, competing with other players, eliminating them, sacrificing the newly obtained powers, and giving up his physical body on numerous occasions for the sake of playing more. In contrast to the addict, who wants to be the best, Avarice just wants more, which is why this game is obsessed with the word more, and why the system keeps dissuading you from playing it. And boy howdy does the game believe that its player base is like Avarice. Ladies, like the two of you that I know are in the audience, and gentlemen, I am not a very patient man. I was willing to put up with this game's shit for a while if it meant that the good things it had to offer would lead to some sort of satisfying conclusion, but it never did. After getting rid of the 3 special enemies and their abilities, you also lose all of your perks for the final battle. All of them. Gone. Not only does it strip you of all the skills you've learned over the course of the game and turn it back into the bare bones structure of the original in a final level that's the exact same as the rest, only longer, but it also leads into the ending, which is one of the biggest fuck yous I've ever experienced. Avarice beats the system. Great. Good for you. Now what? Node 100 where you can play through 100 levels for roughly 2 hours without dying? Sure, why not? A node with infinite levels? What the hell else am I gonna do with my life? Bring it on! Oh, I know what's perfect for this narrative. May I suggest waiting for 8 fucking hours before being able to play the game again? No joke, after beating the game, you have to wait for 8 hours straight without quitting for some fictional system to reboot so you can play again. Congrats, you can go and have a good night's sleep or finish a trip in Desert Bus in the meantime. Sure, it was later shortened to 2.5 hours, but don't let this distract you from the fact that the game is insulting you. It thinks it can berate and mistreat you because you'll keep playing it no matter what. I know it's tempting, and even if you do love this game in ways that I don't, you should realize you're turning into Avarice, who didn't learn anything by the end of the game and just keeps playing and playing without any other goal in life, not even if he wins or loses. A game that's so similar to its previous installment that you may have not even realized I've used footage of the first game for over half the video so far to show you how interchangeable they are. Did the system win because it killed any greater purpose Avarice's life could have had, or did Avarice win because it gave the system the pointless purpose of trying to beat him? I don't know. All I know is that I don't want the game to beat me, so I'm stopping it right there because it failed to see the same thing that Avarice failed to see. Sometimes, less is more. Now, everything I've just said, everything I've laid upon you about Mind Control Delete and Superhot, anything before this moment right here, forget about it, ignore it, delete it from your recent memory, empty everything related to these two games from your mind with the exception of the story and its meaning, because I have to say something. Something that game review channels never say. Something that will hopefully redeem me of my mediocrity and shallow ways of thinking in the eyes of the people that I admire. Buckle the fuck up, people, because I'm about to do the unthinkable and find meaning in something that probably doesn't have any in order to cope with the numerous existential crises I'm going through due to current events and mask it as entertainment. So, has anyone ever heard of Paint the Town Red? It may be easy to dismiss any praise I give to this game on the basis that it's just one of those games made by a team of 1 or 2 people that every Let's Player on the face of the earth has used and abused at some point in their career to get views. And that's because it really is, and we shouldn't pretend it's not. Not to insult the dedicated fans of Paint the Town Red with a billion hours of gameplay invested into it, but I think that we can all agree that games like these peak when a popular YouTuber has recently played them, allowing for a barrage of new players to barge in and subsequently leave when they've realized that the only reason that they enjoyed this game is because of the personality playing it and not the game itself. itself. It's not hard to see why. Paint the Town Red is a very unique game that offers something completely different from any other game I've played. Does this remind you of anything by any chance? For the uneducated people who didn't do their research after I mentioned this game in the description of my shitty Christmas video, Paint the Town Red is a first-person beat 'em up where the goal is to embrace your inner catharsis demon and beat the living soul out of people in different public spaces, like bars, discos, and the like. Also, did you know that a beat 'em up is called a me versus the neighborhood game in Spanish? I thought that was a very interesting detail to include, but I didn't know where to put it in the script, so I'm saying it now. That's it. You walk into a location, start a bar brawl, murder everybody, and leave. It sounds simple, and for the most part it is, but what really carries this game is the way that all of this is done. For starters, the art style is unique because absolutely everything is made up of cubes or polygons, including little details like blood, fire, and even the ocean. This also allowed the developers to make all enemies voxel-based, which means that the player has the liberty to destroy them in any way they like, which makes them feel more powerful because the bodies react accordingly to the damage received rather than just having decals or pre-made generic gibs. Gameplay-wise, the player has a weak punch, a strong-winded punch, a kick, stamina that unlocks powers, and the ability to pick up weapons to help you do more damage or increase knockback. I'm not gonna go too in-depth into it because it's honestly pretty straightforward and not too complicated. The only things you need to know is that the kick knocks enemies back and has a recharge, and picking your fights is important. It's a very satisfying and fun game because of the enemy destruction, the ragdoll physics, the creativity, the fact that it can be pretty challenging despite how simple it is, and because it's the only game that's ever allowed me to properly feel like Popeye. Despite this, it used to be a game that was hard to continue playing after a while because of the limited amount of levels it still has. Luckily, as time passed, new levels and modes were added, as well as a level editor to let players make the shit they wanted for themselves. The arena, for example, has a couple of challenges of ascending difficulty you can complete, as well as an endless mode. The challenges are usually a good way to familiarize yourself with key game strategies, like picking your fights, learning what some enemies do, keeping track of your health, and understanding resource management. Though not terrible by any means, they can be easy to complete or patently bullshit depending on the challenges, and endless mode leaves a lot to be desired in terms of set goals to accomplish, which takes us to the important game mode I'm going to focus on. Beneath. Beneath is the real motherlode and treasure of Paint the Town Red. Being developed for around a year in an attempt to give players something to do once they were done playing the normal levels, Beneath surprised absolutely everyone when it was released, and for a good reason. It's a roguelike game mode where you choose a class with different abilities in order to begin your descent into the depths of hellish caves, fighting all sorts of new enemies, buying power-ups, and even facing bosses along the way. Nobody at all expected a game mode as complex as this one to come out of what was essentially Wii Sports Boxing Minecraft edition, but the amount of dedication put into it and its replayability make it undeniably the game's strongest point nowadays. You can look at the environments in the facility you start in, the caves, the enemies, the new mechanics, and appreciate the amount of time and effort that's gone into them. With the introduction of the new classes, you've even got new ways to play, with each class bringing new things to the table, and with the addition of multiplayer, this mode has really ascended beyond what was expected to come out of a game like this one. The new classes include the Spectre and some other ones that don't matter, because the only way to get shit done is by playing the Spectre. So, in other words, play the Spectre, man. We all need you to become a decent member of society. Now, let me talk about the lore of Beneath, because let me tell you, Paint the Town Red is deep, man. More than you could ever imagine. The world of Paint the Town Red is one full of violence, where several instances of people fighting and killing each other on different occasions just happen for no apparent reason. I say apparent because it's later discovered in the present day that several of these instances are directly related to a violent anomaly that spreads a hate plague within the planet's core that could potentially cause the end of all life on Earth as we know it. Some organization discovers a cave that could lead to where the anomaly is located and builds a facility where scientists analyze the monstrosities lying beneath and sends teams of super soldiers in attempts to control the anomaly with various degrees of success, as the majority die, turn into zombies, or give up and join the anomaly as cultists. None of this is explained to you. There's no elaborate cutscene showing you any of this, nor is there a giant wall of text telling you. This is all littered around the facility that you spawn in before starting your run, and in the caves once you actually descend. You get to learn what the scientists speculate on, the research they've done, and the opinions of some of the soldiers by visiting their quarters or the shower room. You get to see how these people live, how they monitor everything, how this one sick-looking fuck has a 0% approval rating amongst the people in the facility, and how many teams doing field research have failed while on their mission. You even get the implication that the scenarios you play in the normal game and arena are just simulations of the original incidents caused by the anomaly to train the super soldiers to prepare them for the amount of violence they'll be subjected to. As minute as these details may be, they serve the purpose of setting the tone, building a living world that feels populated by real people who are facing the possibility of extinction and helps you empathize with them, even if they never say a single word. If you play the game in a linear manner, you'll eventually get to a point where you face the first major boss in the game, the Necromancer. The Necromancer acts like an evil presence in the realm of Beneath, and you're led to believe that he is the anomaly and the root of all evil in this world, and that by killing him, you'll be able to free everyone from the pain and suffering he's caused. You don't. By choosing to go on this mission and kill the necromancer, the soldier you control has already sealed his fate. He's already dead. Finito. Omae wa mo shindeiru. Whatever you want to call it, this guy will not live. He's done. His next objective is to go to the gates that await him and sacrifice himself by entering an Iron Maiden in order to release one of the 3 runes that keep the doors shut. You should now be able to go back to the facility and notice that some of the scientists have crossed out the necromancer on the diagram on the wall. Since the diagram is a triangle, then that means that there's 2 other bosses to face before actually getting past that door. By this time, you should have also noticed that there's a puzzle involving maps in the crystal caves. A puzzle that when solved takes you to the next boss, an asteroid infected with some sort of hentai tentacle monster. Sacrifice another soldier to the Iron Maiden and there you go, another boss gone. There's also a 3rd boss, but I'm not gonna go over it because its wiki page is already several pages longer than the total amount of hours I've slept in the past few months. Long story short, it involves this asshole, a lot of waiting for a tumor on the ground to grow, and a complicated battle. But what you have to know is that asshole number 1 transforms into the boss, the trickster, and tries to kill you in a virtual world, but fails. Or in my case, succeeds twice. This time you don't have to sacrifice another soldier to the Iron Maiden, since you can just walk right through. You end up in a place called Fire and Blood and get to the final boss of the game, the end. And whoever came up with that name should be fired, because I've already made a Minecraft joke, and because the only other joke I got in mind about ending things involves a gun, a news, a magnet, and a box of chocolates if I'm creative enough, which my mom would never stop complaining about if I ever said it. The end is a classic revive all previous bosses sort of deal, where he revives some of the stronger enemies you've faced previously before attacking you himself. Defeat the end and you've beaten Beneath, and it ends with what I felt was a very touching ending. Your character dies. They all die. It's here, looking solemnly at the horizon on the beach, that we get some time to ponder about the many sacrifices, the suffering, the fact that these people knew they'd probably die were they to embark on this journey and still continue it anyway. All for a sliver of a chance, to save what they knew and loved, or hated and abhorred, expecting nothing in return, not even recognition, or a guarantee to come out alive. But screw that nonsense, you can now go and grind to level up the rest of your characters. Or play another game, I suppose, since the other classes aren't the Spectre. Now, this is the moment where I put myself on trial to be executed, because now that I've explained what the story is about, I'm going to try to find out what the hell it's trying to say. If you're familiar with literature in general, or just paid enough attention in middle school, you may be able to see some parallels that this story has with the Italian epic known as Devil May Cry. I mean Dante's Inferno. I mean Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. The player begins a descent into the caves leading to the end, like how Dante enters the gates of hell, a place where opportunists and fence-sitting angels who only looked out for themselves rather than picking good or evil are destined to suffer. The way that the player descends even further and further in order to reach the end is similar to the concept of Dante going further down the circles of hell whilst witnessing different forms of horror in each one. While there are seemingly only 3 areas that the player descends to, more are progressively unlocked as the player continues to descend, just like how new circles of hell are unlocked by different levels of sin. While transitioning from one area to another, the player will pass through a bridge, perhaps an analogy for crossing the river Heron, and the mages that create portals to help you skip levels represent either Charon and Phlegias, the ferryman, or Virgil, the poet who guides Dante through his journey. And yes, those were Greek pronunciations, I tried. The gates with the Iron Maiden share similarities with the gates of Dis, where angels prohibit Virgil and Dante from crossing to an even more horrible place than where they find themselves now. The realm of Dis, or Pluto, the king of the underworld, which I'm sure also reminds you of someone. This idea could be reinforced by the fact that the flaming tombs like the Iron Maidens are actively present in the circle of hell immediately following the gates in the Divine Comedy, where heretics like the ones who just killed the followers of the king of the underworld you're playing as need to suffer and die in order to open them. Additionally, the 7 types of biomes you stumble across after you descend correlate directly to 2 major factors. The fact that the 7th circle of hell in the Divine Comedy is the one representing violence specifically, like how violence is omnipresent in this game, as well as the 7 deadly sins. These sins are represented in different ways through some of the enemies found throughout your journey to the end. The gremlins with the money are greed, the golems are sloth, crystal crawlers are gluttony, the centurion is envy, the deceiver is pride, the pyro and beast are wrath, and those horrible leapers that want to screw your face are lust. If you want to draw one more parallel to a character representing something, then look no further than the trickster, a clear XP of Lucifer who betrayed his kind to turn into a terrifying monster with many faces. Screw it, let's throw the whole facility where you're starting there as well, because it represents purgatory, a place place where people can turn to good or evil depending on their actions and reactions to the environment around them. The people here are clearly flawed, as lots of them eventually turn into cultists that fight for the end. Is that why the super soldiers are going down beneath? Are they criminals and sinners that are being sent into their doom and eternal suffering in the circles of hell because they've already forsaken their chances to be good people? Are the scientists any better for sending these people to what's probably their certain death for what they believe is the greater good? Are some of the soldiers coming here on their own accord to save the world because it's the right thing to do? Or is it because they just want to do good things to selfishly achieve salvation? If that's the case, then what is the definition of morality and good and evil? There's clearly both good and evil in what these people are doing, so where does this muddled gray area we're all sitting in lead into? Good? Evil? If there isn't, then why bother? If everything is nuances, you can be the most horrible person imaginable and still be able to tip over to the side of good. But that isn't good. It's bad. But it's nuanced, so it's good. Stop! As you can see, there's a lot to say. Maybe you can poke a couple holes in the whole Dante allegory by pointing out the presence of Nordic runes, zombies, and how the floating islands are nowhere near as close as the heaven Dante's third part of the Divine Comedy describes, but take your time to realize something. This shit YouTuber bait game has more to say than "it's the most innovative shooter I've played in years." By not forcing a specific message down your throat and having broad details with cohesive themes, Paint the Town Red manages to create more meaning than Superhot ever did without saying a single word. Which is why I felt pain when I saw that Paint the Town Red added a Superhot modifier for its scenarios. That's all that Superhot left to me, a gimmicky game mode that countless amounts of games must now have to artificially extend their playtime. Paint the Town Red isn't any of that. It's a fun game where you can kill time, or it's a narrative masterpiece that you can extract something meaningful out of. And fuck it, I'm going to do that right goddamn now to prove it to you. My interpretation about what this story is really about goes as follows. The entire journey is about finding and discovering yourself by overcoming hardships in all the areas of your mind. The caves represent your unwillingness and stubbornness because of their size and restrictive tunnels. The islands are your creativity and openness to new experiences, seeing as you need to be creative enough to think to connect the two maps to get there. The sensitivity is touched upon by the crystal caves, which embody beauty but also fragility. The private sanctuary of your consciousness are the ruins, since they are behind that giant cluster of sissy feelings, and Fire and Blood is the problem itself, which you can unlock only after examining and dominating everything about yourself. You choose to go down to the root of the problem. If you don't, then you are doomed, bound to turn into someone like the Trickster, a malicious parasitic entity who gave up in his quest to defeat his own inner demons and now wanders around aimlessly, being a pain in everybody's life until someone either tries to fix him or ends him, whereupon he turns into a part of your own mind, creating false good memories, tainting ones whenever he was present, and planting seeds of despair when you least expect them, on your private life where you're the most vulnerable. Even if you do defeat him, he leaves behind an irremovable scar that causes pain when you remember it's there. But that's okay, because the scars that could have killed you yesterday may be the ones that could save you tomorrow. You should also remember that this journey is better when you've got the right people to help you through it, and that it will get violent, so you should really be careful in not harming them so that you can all get there in the end and celebrate when it's over. If there is such a thing. And that's just the meaning I'm choosing to derive from it. Maybe it's about surviving in the current infectious climate, overcoming hardships such as not being able to connect with or sometimes even speak to your friends and family. Maybe it's about having a long-distance relationship where you begin to feel insecure about not doing your part or fearing that the other half isn't doing theirs. Maybe it's about seeing the greater scope of things and achieving a goal that may seem impossible to reach within our realms of reality, but you still hold on to your dream and continue to work for it despite how futile all efforts may seem. Maybe it's about dealing with the loss of your closest, most meaningful relationship, coping with the fact that you have to live with the shitty things you did for the rest of your life and know that it's never ever going to be okay, so all you can do now is stay strong and accept that the world is not going to be nice to you. Maybe you just want to make a banger meal by putting meat and veggies together within 2 slices of bread. The foundation is strong enough to support any of these, and the only thing keeping you from connecting to one or coming up with your own is a VR headset beating you over the head with a simulation resembling complex themes disguised as red men with guns. And you may think I'm an idiot for saying this stupid game I bought 4 years ago has a meaning because it's ultimately easy to make connections when themes are broad and you're actively looking for something specific. But I don't think it's wrong to do so, especially with the track record this disaster of a year has had. Video games can be meaningful, and it's why it fucking angers me when people don't give them the time of day as pieces of art as much as they do books or movies. But alas, that is the life of a critic. Watching everything you hold dear decrease in value because you need to consume said things you enjoy constantly to make a living, diminishing your sense of enjoyment as you begin to see how cynically made made the next product is after seeing the last one. It's easy to shit on or praise something without giving it much thought when your opinion on the value of said thing is the sole reason you can put food on your table. I'm not saying critics can't discover something of value when they see it. I'm just suggesting that when you objectify things that can transmit meaning and treat them like a product, you begin to sacrifice some of the beauty you could have discovered in it to begin with, because everybody is trying to make a good product for you to rate, not appreciate. If I were to present you with the most beautiful song I've ever heard in my life as a product rather than as a piece of art, you could just go, damn man, that's a good song. Or maybe even,
Yes, this song. I've listened to this song 7 consecutive times, and I can say that it is a song that's very special to a couple of people. It has some very high highs, some very high lows, some low highs, and some low lows. And I can say that it is very whimsical. It tries to be broad and appealing in its very synthetic sound, although it is a bit overproduced. The artists, they were trying to convey a message of innocence and darkness at the same time, but I don't think that they were in their element. They were trying to tackle on some serious themes, and I don't think they quite nailed it on spot because it is very rough. The message comes off as rough, and the edges are clearly not well cut. And despite that I have some sense of nostalgia, given that this song came out like 70 years ago, I feel that I may have realized that it is not for me. It borders on too much on higher planes of existence and lower planes of understanding. So I'm feeling that at most I could give this a strong 3 and at least I could give it a light 4. So yeah, that's what I think about it.
to you, this could be a shitty song about an overpriced element on the periodic table done by a band that makes bleep bloop 8-bit music for a living, but for me it's a creative and musical masterpiece that can drive me to tears without fail whenever I listen to it. Art is not about the medium, it's about finding your own meaning, pertinent to your life and your life alone in things, be they otherworldly or mundane, and how they're important for you, since beauty lies within the eyes of the beholder. In the words of Kraftwerk, life is timeless. Thank you for watching, and I hope you can find your own happiness just as I struggle to find mine. Shit.